So today our presentation is on attitudes to death in society.
Is not a new phenomenon. In the history of humanity, however, what matters is the perception among every population and the attitudes towards the socio-economic, environmental, and health factors surrounding it. Although life is inevitably subject to termination and a myth, there are still differences in the way individuals and groups perceive the end of it. The differences in individuals and groups on different understanding of life itself, such as life being seen from religious perspectives, cultural perspectives, as well as scientific perspectives. In modern time, death seems to give people a chance to die serenely and calm by comparing to the past when people died in torment and pain.
It has become evident that in the modern age, society has lost sight of the importance of rituals surrounding death and dying, along with death education, O'Gorman 1998 states. They follow up by saying, consequently, patients and professionals alike found themselves unable to cope with the inevitability of death. Um, oh, in the past, religion and healthcare have been very closely related, and as such, saw many rituals being upheld throughout the treatment of individuals and death. Only in recent times a disconnect was seen, with this separation occurring largely in highly developed nations, Keown 2012 says. Sigmund Freud was a key supporter in this disconnect. In 1907, he published an article titled Obsessive Actions and Religious Practices, where he relates religious ideals and practices to obsessive tendencies, as religions require the individual to sacrifice his instinctual pleasure to the deity. These are collective thoughts throughout literature. As institutions became more disembodied from religion, the more society did the same, affecting all parts of life, especially individuals' interpretations of death.
Death today has become considered such a negative thing to avoid and delay that doctors consider themselves to have failed if a patient dies. A reason for these confused contemporary Western attitudes of death could be that Christian morality, which has guided our values throughout the years, has disappeared, leaving us with no spiritual framework to cope with death. It's been suggested that we need to revive old Christian morality or adopt a new set of values that better fit our modern times. The need for a spiritual framework for coping with our inevitable death is emphasized by Westerners flocking to Eastern practices like Buddhism. Cultures other than our own don't usually see death as a discrete event to be avoided, but as a process. It's shown in rituals that mark biological death and rituals of mourning that aren't seen in Western societies today. It's also been suggested that we've put our morality in the hands of social workers, and by doing so we've lost the rituals necessary to assign profound meaning to death as we do with birth, marriage, retirement and other rites of passage.
With death becoming something that happens behind closed doors and not in plain view of everyone, many people may only learn about it from what they read in the newspaper or online and watch on TV. In some cases, this may have distorted how people feel about death by making it something that only happens in over-the-top ways, leading people to be surprised when they encounter a real death. It may also have kept people aware of death's existence. It can also lead to people becoming afraid of dying in the hands of a murderer due to over-reporting in the news. Many reports have been written about the role mass media has in modern society's attitude towards death and how death is dealt with.
From the literature gathered, attitudes of death clearly differ between traditional and modern views. Literature suggests that traditional attitudes of death delve into religious and spiritual aspects, connecting death with a greater purpose as explained in the literature, seeing death as a force of nature or an autonomous being with an immortal soul. It also suggests that, traditionally, death was an expected and common part of life that couldn't be avoided, thus assisting people in coping with death or dying. In contrast, it can be inferred from the gathered literature that modern attitudes of death are shaped by media and have a lesser connection to spirituality. The misrepresentation of death in media and the lack of a spiritual framework, as shown in the literature, suggest an attitude of avoidance of death. By creating a disconnect between death and the experiences of death, it greatly alters a person's coping. Although modern medicine and healthcare have advanced in such a way that allows for healthier and longer life, the reviewed literature suggests the lack of mourning rituals, spirituality, and the traditional general commonality of death have greatly blurred perceptions of death. Avoidance and withdrawal from grief is a recurring theme in the literature on modern attitudes of death, whilst literature on traditional attitudes of death have common themes of spirituality and acknowledgement of the inevitability of death.
Although ethics is concerned with the differences between right and wrong, what is right and what is wrong when it comes to issues of dying and death vary widely from culture to culture, religion to religion, and even individual to individual. There are three general sets of ethical issues that need to be faced when considering matters of death and dying: defining life and the cessation thereof, determining the quality of life that the individual experiences, and deciding how the body should be treated after death. For many people, the parameters of ethical behavior are defined by their religious beliefs. No matter how decisions of death and dying are informed, however, such questions are best faced when the individual is still mentally sound and able to communicate his or her wishes. This ensures that the wishes of the individual are fulfilled upon death and makes it easier for the family to make decisions and prepare for the loss of their loved one. Research has demonstrated that the personal death attitudes of physicians influence their professional behaviors, including the declaration of compassion and the provision of end-of-life care. In fact, research to date has demonstrated that negative attitudes such as anxiety and fear adversely affect doctors' profession conduct, including the arrangement of quality end-of-life care. However, the effects of the positive death attitude of acceptance have been to a great extent unexplored, regardless of the likelihood that this development could enhance physicians' end-of-life care. Because of globalization and change in the healthcare delivery system, there has been a progressive change in the attitudes of the medical community as well as the general public towards greater acceptance of euthanasia as an option for terminally ill and dying patients. Physicians in developing countries came across situations where such issues were raised with increasing frequency.
So my thoughts on the current attitudes of death are that I feel like they need to be revised. There are people who have a more traditional approach to death, and there are people who have a more modern attitude towards death. And my recommendation is that they can take something from each other to build the best approach in dealing with grief, loss, and death and dying.
So my mom has a saying, religion is a wonderful thing, I wish I believed in it. Well, it isn't something I believe in. Many of the core values and ideals are things that we can all learn from. The way death is treated and supported is definitely something lacking in today's society, with the possibility of improving people's lives if we take some of those ideals to heart.
So I believe that death is inevitable. It may or not be a definite end, yet I find comfort in knowing that there somehow is a place to rest. Personally, I think this is due to my cultural and religious influence. However, it varied widely from culture to culture, religion to religion, and even individual to individual.
My recommendation is that media outlets need to depict more realistic death scenarios in order to prevent misinformation about how it occurs spreading.
Before doing this subject, I had no idea that there were any other ways of dealing with my own death other than putting it in a compartment in my mind and having a panic attack when it crept out. My experience could be an isolated one, but I doubt it. Now I understand that there are more traditional cultures that don't treat death with so much fear and avoidance, and that modern attitudes are sterile and excessively fearful.
Attitudes of death have shifted over the many years, transforming from traditional views to the modern attitudes that most are familiar with today. The literature that's been critically analyzed and gathered states the key differences between the two and draws a contrasting line between the spiritual-led traditional attitudes and withdrawn and disconnected modern attitudes of death where individuals have become more fearful of dying.